Well, happy Sunday to everyone, and a happy Father's Day to all. It's always good to be in the house of the Lord. My sermon today is entitled, An Idea Whose Time Has Come. In the book of John, in the second chapter, the story is told of Jesus changing water into wine. Jesus' mother let him know that the party had run out of wine, and his response to her was, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." On multiple occasions, Jesus references time as it relates to his life, telling his disciples his hour had not yet come. Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well, "The hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth." Time is a thing that we use to benchmark along the continuum of our lives, special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Time is a thing that we use to designate monumental world events. And I believe that unquestioningly, we are living during one of those special moments in time. There's a worldwide pandemic. There's a worldwide recession. And of course, the unprecedented social movement in the pursuit of justice and equality for all people. Victor Hugo once said, "Greater than the tread of mighty armies is an idea whose time has come." And brothers and sisters, I believe that we're at a point in the history of the world where we can either choose to sit on the sidelines, bury our heads in the sands of ignorance, apathy, and denial, or we can become a part of the raging river of demand for social justice for people of color in America. By the way, this demand is nothing new. The fight's been going on for 401 years in America. In fact, protests occurred from the beginning with slaves who killed themselves on the voyage to America rather than to live in bondage. In the United States, the myth of the contented slave was essential to the preservation of the South's peculiar institution. And the historical record of rebellions was frequently clouded by exaggeration, censorship, and distortion. For the 2 centuries preceding the American Civil War, one historian found documentary evidence of more than 250 slave uprisings. This movement of unrest and protest is as American as the Boston Tea Party. So important was the right to protest that the Founding Fathers specifically guaranteed in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution the right of the people to petition their government for a redress of grievances. It'd be really nice if petitioners were able to simply write a letter to their congressperson or visit that congressperson and receive redress for those grievances. But that's simply not the way the world works, nor has it ever worked. It's not the way that things get done. People in power who benefit from the status quo are not going to, nor have they ever simply ceased oppressive behavior. From the time before Pharaoh, people in power have done what was necessary to protect that position of power. I believe that Frederick Douglass eloquently expressed that opinion in his West Indies Emancipation speech, which was delivered August 3rd, 1857, on the 23rd anniversary of that event. Quote, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows or both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." Close quote. I come to you this morning under the full weight of confession that I am not neutral in this struggle. I am one who is weary of a lifetime of accumulated discriminatory slights. For my grandmother trying to explain to a 4-year-old the reason that her neighbor poisoned our dog, and the reason was that we were colored. For my mother, in utter frustration trying to explain to me why we couldn't swim in a particular pool or go to a particular movie theater. From watching a neighborhood that we moved into change from 100% white to 95% African American in the course of a year. Attending a junior or senior high school where we bused to that school on a different schedule than the other students, so if we wanted to participate in any after-school sport or activity, we had to miss the bus and then walk 3.5 miles to our neighborhood. Having high school counselors steer Black students into careers other than those of college. Having a homeowner slam the door in our faces with an angry refusal to sell to coloreds as we tried to buy a house closer to the school. In the United States Navy, despite scoring well above the qualifying threshold, being told off the record that I couldn't become a translator because Black people weren't trustworthy in keeping the nation's secrets. There were countless of slights, slurs, and acts of discrimination at my overseas duty station. I came home to be part of the never-ending group of Black males who have been stopped for driving while Black. As a realtor showing up at a listing to find that the prospective client suddenly decided not to sell. And on and on and on. The problem of race in America is complex. Race is intertwined in the very fabric, in fact, in the whole cloth of that which makes us what we are as a people today. We hold in the highest esteem a document called the Declaration of Independence. And central to that document is the statement that all men are created equal. Left unstated was the condition that all men are created equal if you were male and white. The ratification of the Constitution literally hung in the balance of the acceptance of what is known as the 3/5 rule. For the purpose of taxation and the determination of congressional representation, Black people were considered to be 3/5 human and 2/5 animal. The 3/5 compromise, by the way, is found in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution. I want to take a moment to look at the ramifications of institutionalized racism as it's tied to this very important historical fact. I know we live in a 20-second soundbite world, but some things require greater explanation. Some things are simply more complex, and this is one of them. The 3/5 compromise gave a disproportionate representation of slaves in the House of Representatives relative to the voters in free states until the American Civil War. And as a result of that, Southern states had a disproportionate influence on the presidency, the Speaker of the House, and the Supreme Court. Historian Gary Willis speculated that without the additional slave state votes, Jefferson would have lost the presidential election of 1800. Also, slavery would have been excluded from Missouri. Jackson's Indian removal policy would have failed, and slavery would have been banned in territories that were won from Mexico, an entirely different landscape. After the Civil War, Section 2 was superseded by another section in Article 1, and it explicitly repealed this compromise. It provided a new law of the land, where representatives would be apportioned, counting the whole number of persons in each state. A later provision of the same clause reduced the congressional representation of states who denied the right to vote to adult male citizens. And that seemingly is a good thing, except that that provision was never effectively enforced. After the Reconstruction era came to the end in 1877, former slave states subverted the objective of these changes by using various voter suppression strategies. And they did so to disenfranchise Black voters. They gained the benefit of counting Black people for the purpose of representation, but they denied them the right to vote, so it concentrated the vote in the hands of a few whites. It gave Southerners great voting power, and it inflated the number of Southern Democrats in the House of Representatives, as well as the number of votes that they could exercise in the Electoral College and the election of the president. The Southern bloc, comprised of Southern Democrats, voted into office by white voters, constituted a powerful voting bloc in Congress up until the 1960s. Their representatives were reelected essentially in a one-party system over and over again. And by doing that, they gained seniority in the House. And as a result of that seniority, they got chairmanships. And as a result of that, it gave them control over rules and budgets and important patronage projects, among other issues. Their power allowed them to defeat over and over again federal legislation against racial violence and abuses in the South, until those were overcome by the civil rights movement. One of the challenges that white citizens face is dealing with the resentment of people of color when they individually do not engage in discriminatory practices. I've often heard the lament that I didn't discriminate against anyone, but they also don't understand how deeply embedded into the very foundations of the most venerated and powerful institutions of the United States of America. They don't understand that they don't have to actively behave in a discriminatory manner to be the benefit of white privilege. White privilege is baked into our system. What can be difficult to see are the institutional policies and practices of decades that may be outlawed today, but have had long-term consequences. Let me give you an example. The Ohio State University was founded in 1870. The first graduated income tax in the state of Ohio was in 1912. So for the next 50 years, Black people who faced university policies that limited their ability to send their children to OSU contributed tax dollars to educating white children so those children could get a better job, become supervisors, create more wealth, live in safer neighborhoods, go to better schools, afford better health care, and essentially give their children a leg up on the next generation of people of color. With such an enormous advantage, that gap today continues to grow. The Kirwan Institute of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University has reported that a child that's born in Dublin today and a child that's born today east of Parsons Avenue has a 21-year difference in life expectancy. There are real-world consequences for racism and poverty, and racism and poverty go hand in hand. One of the subtle continuing practices in which people engage is submitting to peer pressure. It's listening to that joke that's ethnically, racially, or sexually demeaning another person and not speaking up and telling someone you think it's inappropriate. It's tacitly accepting that behavior in others. Does it take courage to speak? Yes, it does. But Christians aren't wimps. With your Heavenly Father standing with you, who can stand against you? While I am tired of the same old thing, I am hopeful. This groundswell protest seems somehow different than others that have occurred in my lifetime. It's as though there's a convergence of unrelated things that have made confronting America's past and present relationship to race an idea whose time has come. The pandemic has kept us sheltered and more dependent on the internet. The technology of the cell phone provides us visual information in real time. We were able to watch a galvanizing event. We got to see a murder take place before our very eyes. 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a snuff film with members of law enforcement as perpetrators and as enablers. We saw incontrovertible evidence of one human being taking the life of someone they obviously did not view as a fellow human being. So here we are, in the midst of a powerful social movement. So what is our role as citizens? What do we do as Christians? Being a Christian implies that we're people of good character, but being of good character is not enough. Being a Christian implies that we care about those who are the least among us, but simply caring is not enough. Being a Christian implies that we're concerned with the poverty of person and of spirit, but being concerned is not enough. Being a Christian implies that we are people of goodwill, but goodwill is not enough. Being a Christian implies that we're good people, but being a good person is not enough. The 18th century statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke famously said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." He went on to say that when people are linked together, they easily and speedily communicate the alarm of any evil design. When people are linked together, it enables them to oppose evil with a united strength. When men are not acquainted with one another's principles, where there's no personal interaction, where there's no friendship, no common interest, evil wins. The good must associate to combat the evil ambitions of evil men. If we don't unite, the good people will fall, in his words, one by one, an unpitied sacrifice in a contemptible struggle. I'm not a big fan of Black History Month. While some recognition of Black history is better than no Black history at all, and that's pretty much what I had when I was in high school, Black people are a part of and have contributed to America's history 24/7 for 401 years. What I want is a history that's neither a Black history or a white history, but an accurate representation of the American history, warts and all. Fortunately, we have Google, we have the library, and we can find volumes of literature if we choose to educate ourselves about racism in America. I might recommend a good starting point is a book called Don't Know Much About History. Everything that you need to know about American history but never learned, and it was written by Kenneth C. Davis. This book doesn't focus on racism per se, but it does present a more accurate and inclusive picture of the development of the United States. I'll close with this. We're not called to be superhuman. Regardless about our relationship with our earthly fathers, we are called, however, to love our Father in heaven. We're called to love our neighbor. We're called to feed the hungry, to visit the sick, to visit those who are in prison. We're called to help the homeless. And we can best do this when working in concert with other like-minded people. My challenge to you today is simply, boldly, and actively be a Christian. And all God's people said, amen.